I find what it is I should know. It's just a matter of time for you reawaken your mind. Oh, come to know and find out what is true. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening minds. Come to know and find out what is true, yeah. Then you'll know what's in store just for you. No more living a lie. I can look to the sky and say, I'm reawakening minds. Happy Holy Day, Moors, and welcome to House of Reawakening Minds. Since 2011, House of Reawakening Minds has existed to provide for exploration and practice of spirituality in an enlightened community dedicated to honoring the myriad of sacred pathways to the universal creator. We are a holistic center for spiritual grounding, free thought, self-discovery, and Moorish science, an awakening experience for all ages. Tonight, we're pleased once again to present our National Grand Sheik, Taj Tarik Bey, as he presents Self-Governance is Required in Order to Know Thyself. Let us welcome him.
Islam. A couple weeks ago, we went over some of the files that we're sharing for you. Actually, some of the notes on public notice having to do with fundamental elementary civic facts that all nationals and all citizens should be cognizant of, aware of, and totally, how would you say, schooled about. I'm going to hit a couple more and then go in support of our presentment tonight of self-governance. Now, in accord with the ancient Sabian Moorish culture and science, etc., and the principles of government that have been adopted over thousands of years among other nations coming from the old Moabite Canaanite peoples, pretty much expressed in what we know today as constitutional principles. Now, a lot of times when people look at constitution principles, they're usually because of the way that most people have been taught, their mind immediately goes to the Constitution for the United States operating at North America. But the concept and the principles of that Constitution supersede the operations of constructed government operating at Northwest Africa, i.e. Morocco, i.e. North America, Northwest of Mexico, in contemporary times under the United States Corporation Company operatives who have been pretty much occupying Morocco for the last couple of hundred years under colonial operations and under the doctrine of discovery set forth by the popes of Rome, etc. And while the constitutional principles come from Muslim law, i.e., and more specifically, the Anansi Moors, the Anansi Confederation, sometimes referred to by the people as the Iqua Moors or the Iqua Confederation. So the Constitution for the United States is derived from the ancient Moabite Canaanite rules and laws. However, it must also be remembered that when we're talking Constitution, we're not just talking the written documents that you know as a Constitution. We're also talking about the 12 signs of the Zodiac. You're talking about the numbers from 0 to 9. You're talking about geometry, etc., and cosmology, astrology, which comprises the Constitution of the ancient Canaanite Moabite nation, in modern times known as the Moorish nation, which pretty much has been what you call occupied under the hybrid Germanic tribes for the last few hundred years. But I want to mention a few more of the facts that need to be known, civic facts, in order to give you a concept of change of frame of mind for most of the people, which is needed for the liberation of humanity from the dark side priesthood, who have been pretty much governing the planet for quite some time now. Keep in mind, it is not only the restoration, the need for the restoration of the culture and traditions of the ancient Moors among the Aboriginal peoples, relative to cosmology and the mathematical study of self and of nature, etc., which constitutes the culture, etc. But to understand the necessity for people to start intelligently and with knowledge, not with emotions, governing themselves, due to the fact that there has been this misconception that the persons who have been operating government on the land at North America under the guise of the United States federal government, etc., being a de facto and foreign order, due to the fact that it has caused so much injury and suffering to and among the people. Therefore, it is more important, as transitions are made in both consciousness and knowledge among the common people, and particularly among the people of the land, that we be better prepared for the changes that are taking place and the changes which must take place here on Midgard Earth. So I want to make a couple of more notes, and I suggest that you take cognizance of these notes, and then we'll go even into more detail of our discussion tonight. Fact: the King of England financially backed both sides of the conflict in the American Revolutionary War. And for your reference, you will see the Treaty of Versailles, July the 16th of 1782, and the Treaty of Peace 8, Statute 80. And as we mentioned the couple of weeks ago, and in between, we've had some people call and some people contact me even, off the show in relationship to this one, which we had mentioned then. You cannot use the United States Constitution to defend yourself because you are not a party to it. And for that, you see Paddleford Fay and Company versus the mayor and alderman of the city of Savannah, Georgia, 438, 520. Again, America is the name of a major continent among the 7 recognized continents. The United States Corporation doing business at North America is a British colony. The United States is a corporation. It is not a landmass. It existed before the Revolutionary War, and the British troops did not leave North America until 1796. That's a fact, and is more established information for you to recognize that the concepts that the people have in general, that these persons who they've been thinking was a legitimate Congress and Senate operating on the land, thinking that they were actually constitutional officers, but yet in their experiences discovering that these people were doing more things to harm the people, doing more things to unlawfully tax the people, doing more things to unlawfully and oppressively regulate the people, doing more things to force taxation on the people, force drugs on the people, force contracts on the people with private corporations, and force the people to pay taxes for them to send into so-called other countries under the guise of foreign aid, while they were actually setting up private personal funds for themselves in other political nation states under the guise of having authority under the Constitution, when in fact They were not. They were actually operating as foreign agents and foreign operatives. And the so-called lobbyists have been and still are used as a cover for their criminality of stealing funds from the common people of America. That's both the nationals, i.e. the people of the land, and the U.S. corporate citizens who are members of their private foreign corporation operations, etc., and then sending it to other nations to the tune of billions, multiple billions of alleged dollars a year, and then claiming those debts to be on the backs of the people of the land, etc. And they have been getting away with it because the people don't know that these operatives are actually criminals and that they're really trustees for the British colony. So the concepts that the people think that the so-called United States is an independent country was false and still is false. It's a British colony. That's a fact. Now, we know that the people have been going through a lot of pressure from the Whiggamore Party split operatives known as the Conscience Whigs and the Cotton Whigs, commonly known in these contemporary times as the Republican Party and the Ku Klux Klan Democratic Party. That is specifically the Republican Party operating on the land at North America is the split off of the Whiggamore Party, known as the Cotton Whigs, and the Ku Klux Klan Democracy Democrats is known as the is known as the Cotton Whigs. I apologize, and the Republican Party is the Conscience Whigs. And people need to know what they're really arguing about, because what they're really arguing about is really two-body politics of foreign operatives known as Zionists. They are, in fact, Zionists. It has nothing to do with what you like or what you do not like. And they have not been operating in the cares or the concerns of the people, but have been operating in cares and concerns of the Queen of England, answering to the Circle Church and the Chancery on Fleet Street, England, i.e. the Bar Association, and then answering to the Popes of Rome and the Bishoprics of Rome under the Treaty of Verona, etc., with the determined interest and determined mission to overthrow the Republic, which is why you always hear them saying, whether they're from the Conscience Whigs or from the Cotton Whigs, always saying, quote unquote, relative to themselves, quote unquote, our democracy. And that is the code word for the British colony trustees, etc., that these people are arguing over who they're going to vote for or not vote for, not knowing that these people are signed, and the fiction that these people's voices are heard or that they have free speech is all based in fraud.
A couple questions have come up. One question is from Ami. And the question is, both factions are Zionists?
Exactly. See, you know what? Take this in consideration and then ask that question again, because I want to give them something to think about. I'm not going to expand on this, but take this statement and analyze this and talk about this off the show. Our people have been arguing for generations to get off the plantation. Is that not true? Now that the Cotton Whigs have been using the so-called coronavirus as an excuse to cover up the fact that they have stolen all of the Social Security non-funds and all the retirement funds, and they've been stealing people's accounts through the bankers to cover up the fact that the stock market froze or crashed, that the credit windows of the world have frozen, and that the trade windows of the world have frozen. And to cover it up, they've been using this super duper, don't make any reports on the flu reports anymore, it's all corona, to cover up their criminality. So keep that in mind. So now the people have been thrown off the plantations, i.e. their jobs, long O, short O, job jobs. And the trick is to get them to beg for their jobs back. Now they're begging to get back on the plantation. Just take that in consideration. So we won't go deeper into that, but give a thought on that. Now, ask that question again.
The same question?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just want to throw that in to give them something to think about. They want to get off the plantation. Now they're begging. The trap is for them to beg to get back on it. See, no one's talking about the restoration of their estate. You see the whole point? No one's talking about decolonization, which is really what their economic problem is. They're asking to get back on the plantation. See, they're making them suffer to get the people to ask to get back on the plantation so they can justify further corruption.
So the question was, both factions are Zionists?
Exactly. Keep this in mind. So write this down and do a little research, you all. The Whiggamore Party. And do some research on the convention, 1854, etc., to 1863, Knights of Columbus, Ku Klux Klan oath, etc., and Horace Greeley, the New York newspaper tycoon, and his association with the Whiggamore Party, and this convention of 1854 at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and also the split of the Whiggamore Party, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the split being the Conscience Whigs, Republican Party, and the Cotton Whigs, i.e. the Ku Klux Klan, Democratic Party, two sides of the same coin who have been taking over, surreptitiously and via misprision, i.e. with the missionary operations of overthrowing the republic, and thus under a color of authority and a color of law instituted de facto governance on the land under the guise of the United States Corporation Company being falsely taught as a country when it's actually a private human trafficking corporation. That's a fact.
Okay, I'm putting
all right. Was there another one?
Someone said, what about Trump?
Trump is better than all of them wrapped together. He's still a Zionist. Remember, we always say to people, and we've been saying this for the last couple of years, Donald John Trump has an assignment. And I suggest if anyone knows differently to give note to it for the public record. But this is the fact. Donald John Trump is assigned to clean up, whether it was his intentions or not. I'm not arguing that. He's assigned to clean up much of the corruption that has contaminated the rogue state, corporate state that has been feigning as a country for these last couple hundred years, known as the United States, which is known by the nations of the world now as a rogue state who's been using military operations, biological warfare, financial warfare, genocide, assassination, murder, etc., to enforce their secret Treaty of Verona and other operations under the doctrine of discovery. And his job is to clean up some of it to prove worthy that the nations of the earth will continue in the future to trade with them. While the United States Corporation, through their Zionist order, has been controlling artificially with private commercial paper known as Federal Reserve notes, etc., from the Zionist order known as the Federal Reserve, set forth by Woodrow Wilson on Jekyll Island, 1913, etc. Although the operations were instituted in actuality earlier than that, that's their official admission. It is to His job is to clean up some of the mess, or they're not going to trade with them anymore. This is another reason why the trade windows of the world have frozen. Another reason why the credit windows of the world have frozen. This whole game that they've been playing politically as of late is a cover-up for their criminality. So to that point, Donald Trump has more honor than the rest, and I'm not saying that to defend him. I just know part of what his mission is. And I suggest if any of you think that I'm lying, you can have Donald Trump himself call us, and I bet you he won't deny what I just said. Even if they don't discuss it publicly, I'm telling you the facts, and that's what's known. That's a fact. And I suggest you pay attention more to what they do than what they say. However, they're still arguing over our estate. Now, that's the truth.
And there was a request for you to repeat the stare decisis case that said that we don't use the Constitution.
Oh, yes.
To defend, yeah.
Now, here we go. Now, this is a point 17 on this list of factual information shared with you all. And each one of these issues, we could give you more support, but we give you law cases so that you can look them up yourself, because we already know that whenever we come on the air at the House of Reawakening Minds, we already know that certain alphabet soup organizations and foreign agencies always put trolls out, whether they look like us or whether they're otherwise hybrid Europeans. And so we give you law cases so you can research for yourself. Accept not what we say, go do some research. Here we go. Number 17. You cannot use the United States Constitution to defend yourself, because you are not is emphasized, not a party to it. Now, as a case law, you can see Paddleford, Fay, and Company versus the mayor and aldermen of the city of Savannah, 14, Georgia, 438 and 520. Now, if you want me to expand on that a little bit, I'll expand on it a little bit in 2 points. That's number one. When you look at this in relationship to the city, the mayor and aldermen of the city of Savannah, you need to know what that's saying, because that's a party to the matter, right? Now, the city of Savannah is not what you would call Savannah City, as you would see. So when you see the city of, or the state of Georgia, or state of Pennsylvania, or state of Delaware, every time you see that state of, you're dealing with the foreign corporate operatives of the Jesuit order, of the Zionists, who own the Federal Reserve and own the United States corporation company colonies, etc., and has nothing whatsoever to do with the Constitution for the United States derived from Muslim law, as Barack H. Obama had stated, etc., earlier in the last part of his presidency for the corporation. And so the people don't know that the Constitution of the United States is not the Constitution for the United States, and they're not aware of the Organic Act of Congress of 1871, February the 2nd, when the trustees and board of directors who have been claiming to be Congress and senators came out of the closet but didn't tell the people that they actually overthrew the Constitution for the United States, i.e. the Republic, and instituted their democracy platform. And so the alteration of Constitution of the United States, by virtue of them tricking the people to be stock under the U.S. citizen clauses, declared the people to be stock and said and held the position and still hold the position that the people have no constitutional rights whatsoever, can own no property whatsoever, cannot dispute any of the laws, rules, or orders set forth by the United States corporate company operatives, etc., and trustees. And thus, You cannot use the United States Constitution to defend yourself because you're not a party to it. On another point, consider this. If you're not the original people of the land, i.e. the American nationals, etc., from which the principles of that Constitution is derived from the honor honesty, and if you're not direct descendants of the so-called founding fathers that they talk about, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, etc., Thomas Jefferson, etc., in harmony with the treaties and the Constitution, you're not a party to it. And you cannot claim to be one of the brand systems set up by the German Dutch masters, such as Negro, black, and colored people and Indians, etc., and use that Constitution because you're not a party to it. The treaties and that Constitution comes from Moors and a few hybrid European sons under agreements of trade and commerce. This is why you see in the early days the Almoroccan flag, i.e. the red flag with the five-pointed green star, the continental flag, sometimes referred to as the treaty flag, i.e. the Bunker Hill flag, and you see a red flag with a green pine tree, cedar tree, and a white canton, and then you see the stars and stripes, which is a banner of amity and commerce, which is a trading banner, etc. If you're not coming under that or enforcing treaty and constitution, you're not a party to it. And if you're not a descendant, you're not a party to it. Therefore, you cannot use those agreements and those contracts as a defense. And this is, again, with why they do not teach the people civics, because they don't want the people to be obviously or become obviously, cognate of the fact that the persons who are really administrative operatives pretending to be judges, to recognize why they don't have constitutions posted on the doors of these so-called municipal courts, because they are not constitutional courts. They are not creatures of the constitutions, and the persons who are operating those venues are not Article 3 judges. They are indeed administrative executors under executive law, under corporate operations, and are indeed not judges whatsoever. And they don't want you to figure that out, and they don't want you to know that, while that also is established fact, and that's among the list that we're sharing with you, etc. And that's the basis upon which those multiple levels are the basis upon which you can't use that Constitution. And this is, again, why it's important for people to really study civics so they can recognize where they are in their position and status operating on their land, and also others who are operating on our land who claim to be U.S. citizens but are not harmonic with the Republic's Constitution, and wonder why they can't use that Constitution. They're not a party to it. All parties are specifically named and they must be identified. Same thing goes for reparations. Unfortunate truth, but it is. And we don't have to argue it, because every time you see the people keep trying to talk about reparations or restoration or anything like that, they're always what? Flatly ignored by the so-called representatives that they thought was their government.
Okay, Dominique Harris says not being a party to the Constitution from a legal standpoint makes sense.
Legal or factual standpoint, yes.
But it is a trust indenture.
We know that it is.
DEC, the Declaration of Independence, form the trust of which you can place claim upon as progeny.
Oh, now you can say progeny, just like you can say heir, right? Mm-hmm. We can say progeny and we can say heir, right? Now, progeny of what nation state, what pedigree? See, because the parties specifically must be named, because that's the issue. As an example, let me give you an example. There's a treaty between the original legitimate creature officers for the United States Republic and Russia, as an example. If there's a controversy or an argument or any issue that must be addressed between the two so-called recognized nation states, if that's the case, and knowing that the United States is not, you would not see them saying America versus Russia, or Americans this or Americans that, or green people, or doesn't matter what color you are. You will have to name the political platform specifically in order to have a jurisdictional platform under a consular international venue to argue any issue, etc. If there's no treaty between any particular said nation states or political jurisdictions, therefore there would have to be a liaison of another nation state with which the identified parties have treaty, and that other nation state would therefore be a liaison between them, etc., if no treaty exists between them. Therefore, the principle that we're presenting is that all parties must be specifically named. You cannot designate just a status without the identified pedigree or nation state. It doesn't work. Meaning that if you're not the progeny, as an example, if you're not the progeny of the Moors, etc., you cannot use Moorish treaties to entertain your liberties, etc. If you're not a citizen or national of Russia, you can't use the Russian constitution as a defense. If you're not a national or citizen of China, you cannot use the Chinese constitutions or principal laws of liberty to secure your rights. That's common sense. One of the traps that we have been suffering from has been the false concepts that have been promoted under the artificial 14th Amendment operations of civil rights fiction that has been promoted at North America since the 1800s under the guise of liberating Moors of African descent who they had branded as Negroes and blacks under the pretext that they were going to get some rights. Have you noticed even to this day, none of those rights have been recognized? Everybody talks about them, but they still do what? Ritual murders on the street by the day. They have their communities are gentrified. The land of the people have been stolen over and over again in multiple municipal jurisdictions with no protections whatsoever. Women have been raped, murdered in jail, out of jail, on the streets, in their homes, etc. And then you have paid operatives marching these people around talking about U.S. citizens, and they haven't caught on yet that they've been played. They're not a party to the Constitution. They're not a party to the treaties. However, their forebears are, i.e., but their forebears are Moors. But they claim to be black. Therefore, black people have no rights because there's no such people. They never wrote a treaty or a constitution nowhere on the planet Earth. And there's no such place on the earth called Blackadonia, Negro Dinar, or Philadelphia. Doesn't exist. Get over it and get real.
So, Carl, QL says, do Moors need the MSTOA to control governmental operation here in North America?
MSTOA is an organization or outreach organization to bring people back into the constitutional fold of government. That's its missionary work. However, within that structure, Noble Ali did set up a governmental structure. The fact that it has not been operative is quite evident. And so do a little bit of research and answer that yourself. With an addition, I'll make this statement. Noble Drew wrote a direct letter to be read before the temples inferring infiltration into the movement where people were trying to take over the movement and trying to dismiss him out of the movement. So he was already talking about infiltration by people who thought his position was just a joke, and then finding out from the nations of the earth, but they don't recognize the movement without him as the head. So when you talk about the great sellout, and then you're talking about enforcing international constitutional law, because keep in mind, I know that some of you are familiar where you hear this statement: come all ye Asiatics of North America and hear the truth about your nationality and your birthright. You are not Negroes, black, colored, or Ethiopian. Come and link yourselves. Learn of your ancient mothers and fathers' ancient and divine creed. Come and link yourselves back with the families of nations. So clearly that's a civic statement indicating international venue. And an international venue relative to diversity of nationality, where any issues or controversies of land grants, etc., or international rights and liberties are concerned, is an international consular venue. That's a fact, i.e. in Article 3 platform on an international venue as described in Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution for the United States, coming off the treaties that superseded. That's a fact.
Just trying to see if there's any other questions that you need to address. Okay, James Todd says, how do you identify yourself between our Native American blood and Moorish blood, and which treaties do we use?
Well, it's very easily. The tag Native American was created in the 1930s by the occupational Europeans. There is no such thing as Native Americans, i.e. they're all Moors. Whether you talk about the Nanacoke, the Wachita, etc., the Nanakoki, the Mohican, etc., Seminole, Onondaga, etc., all of the different tribes, they are Canaanite, Moabite descent, and some from Sindh that you call India are Naga and Bantu. That's the fact. And collectively, you can call them all Phoenicians. There you go.
I don't know what this question means. This is, what about California?
From Khalifa, that's where you get Caliph from. From Khalifa. Queen Khalifa. You'll see, if you go in Khalifa land, you'll see they'll have all over California this Berber queen with dreads. And people be looking at it, but they're not told the history. Well, yeah, that's Khalifa's land, yes. Oh, you're home. Get over it, Dorothy.
Another question is, would you be able to utilize the Bill of Rights?
See, this is the point. The principles that are embodied in the Bill of Rights pre-exist the Bill of Rights as written in that Constitution. Keep in mind that these principles of that Constitution are already Muslim law that already exist. They're adopted by the hybrid Europeans to do business at Morocco. So the Constitution is adopted from Muslim law. But those principles already exist. It's not given by that Constitution. They already exist with you. You don't need to use that. You need to use your divine birthright and all treaties superseding that Constitution. The Constitution is just simply the obligation of them doing business on our land, which turns them back and reminds them of their obligations to the treaties, i.e., all debts and contracts, Article 6, Supremacy Clause. All debts and contracts entered into before the adoption of this Constitution are binding against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. And all treaties made or which shall be made under their authority, under the authority of the United States, shall be the quote-unquote supreme law of the land. And the judges of every state shall be bound thereby. And any laws or constitution to the contrary, of any states to the contrary, notwithstanding. So when you look at that Constitution, you're always thinking treaty, superseding it. So the Constitution pushes them back to their obligations to you in the first place. Why do you think that most of the politicians don't honor the Constitution? Why do you think the magistrates, the administrative executives claiming to be judges get upset as soon as someone talks about the Constitution? Because they are anti-Constitution, i.e. anti-treaty.
Someone just clarified and said that they were talking about reparations in California.
I know they talk about it in a lot of places. Now, let's deal with this. Reparations, and this is very important. Reparations specifically is the venue operations in international law, whereas one or more specific nation states specifically identified are charged on an international venue, i.e. international court of law, as an an aggressor or party that created an injury on another specified and identified nation state, etc., with all claims specifically listed and given support or factual supports, etc. So specifically an identified specific nation or nations being by law commanded to repair and to restore injuries done to another specifically named and identified people / nation, etc., as remedy. That's called reparations. And I suggest you all go into your law books and look at it. And so when you start coming talking about people of color and the green nation, and it doesn't matter what color you are, nation was injured by some other, doesn't matter what color you are, nation, that stuff is not going to work. The other thing I would suggest that many of you do, look into some of the incidents that took place at the United Nations. And one of the interesting things was, and you all look this up, when Ralph Bunche went before the United States talking about Negroes and rights, etc., and then a lot of the representatives of nations, quote unquote, I repeat, nations got up and walked out because he was insulting them as if he, being a Mason, just like most of them, didn't know that these people ain't Negroes and blacks, that they're Moors. But you can't bring up some fictional brand name as a nation and entertain international law. Stop lying. Get over it. Our people keep trying to be somebody that they're not, and then trying to get the protections of international law on a platform of which they're not a party. You can't use a brand and argue legitimate law. It doesn't happen. Or in the principle of law, they say a slave can't own property. And therefore, a slave not owning property can't claim the liberties or the rights or the inheritances that go with said property. Less more, even owning self.
I went to, I recently looked at a video that showed proof that there were Moors, or melanated men that owned slaves.
Yes.
So slave had nothing to do.
Exactly, it's a status.
And the slaves were of both, of multiple nationalities.
Let's put it, so slave is connotative.
Slavic.
Now, slave is actually Slovakian.
Right.
And it is a term that's contemporary in nature. It's not an ancient term. It is a contemporary, in its connotative form, it's a contemporary connotative form that is used and adopted from the operations of the subjugation of Slovakian people, hybrid Europeans in Northern Asia under Russian operations. And so the shortened term Slav or slave has been used for subjugation. Now, that's a nationality, or that's a general pedigree of some Europeans. Now, connotatively, the subjugation action was connotatively adopted in terms of oppressed people, and thus slave is used connotatively, not properly, but connotatively in what you would call suppressive operations, and in particular, suppressive operations under colonial operations connotatively of suppressing people of African descent. So African people of African descent, i.e. Canaanites, Moabites, known as Moors, have been designated connotatively, operationally, under the term slave, but they in fact were not slaves, they were bound free men. Slave is actually the hybrid European Slovakian nations, Czechoslovakia, etc. And that's fact. So we must also be clear that when certain terms are used, we must be clear between connotative presentment distinguished from, in fact, the true etymological meanings and histories of certain words. And so you'll see a lot of times people or writers or scholars will take the connotative use of the word slave and place it in a time period in more earlier times when in fact that is a false position because it was not used connotatively in earlier forms prior to the Russian occupation of the Slovakian nation areas. That's a fact. It's sort of like people get used to scholars or people claim to be scholars throwing the word slave around and then putting it back into a period of history when it did not exist in its connotative form. That's sort of like people wanting to have a discussion today about whether George Washington, the ninth president for the United States, whether he used an iPhone or iPhone 10 or iPhone 11 or Samsung. It's like having that kind of argument. It's irrelevant. Most likely he didn't have a cell phone at all. Not that that technology didn't exist even prior to him. We're just saying in relationship to their real operations. He probably didn't have an iPhone. And that's the same thing talking about slavery in ancient times.
I want to read a comment from Malik Imhotep Thyself Bey. So the prophet prophesied that I'm going to leave the European here just long enough to teach you how to run a government. I bought you everything it takes to save a nation. Now take it and save yourself.
Exactly.
Each soul is accountable for its actions. Understanding yourself as master and servant of your own government will remove from thee the cares and solicitudes in life, national divine movement in the mind, which goes in line with the quote or that I shared with you.
Yes.
That knowing yourself and
is
where
important.
you really are the two most important issues that you should be involved with. It is your task to find out.
Exactly.
In fact, if someone, and this is what kind of drove this particular topic, because so many people want someone to give them A, B, C, D,
and they must
1,
become
2,
a
3,
part to it.
But it said it is your task to find out. In fact, if someone gave you the correct answers, it would not mean a thing to you, for they would not be attached to you in a way that
exactly.
it would if you would have found them yourself.
And this is where Drew Ali had said, if I told you everything, he said, the half has not been told. If I told you everything, you would go back to sleep. Study yourselves.
Right.
You know, and keep in mind, a lot of times, and this has been our experience over the years, and very often we have this discussion where people come to a forum like this and they expect you to give them a red pill or a blue pill outside of knowledge, if you get the point, or to rescue them, or we got a headache, give us an aspirin. They're stealing our rights, give us a pill. Make a statement so I can go into a court, not even identifying that these places aren't courts, you know, and then having what you call these pill expectations, which is a wrong concept. And then you find people will become cognizant of some of these facts and want to cure overnight, but they have not been participating or active in their responsibility to themselves and their families in relationship to their status and in relationship to absorbing this information and expanding on it. But they want the benefit of it. The same way when you see a lot of people get cognizant of this information now, because we're already under attack. It doesn't just arrive. We're already under attack. And I know that you've experienced over this last decade and more, people coming into this forum, even at the House of Reawakening Minds, as I have, you know, experienced people coming into the roundtable venue for years. When the doo-doo hits the fan and the corporate operatives are openly abusing them, you know, it's not subtle, then they come to start a process of learning and want to know this overnight when they really haven't been participating. And you can give them certain answers. And it's not absorbed in them because it's not a party. They're not a party to it. So it is not a party to them. Not that it doesn't belong to them. And then there's the lack of knowing and lack of understanding and the false expectations, whereas they are not aware that these so-called administrative executives who have been claiming to be judges are Masons, Knights Templars, Skull and Bones, Knights of Columbus, and know already that these people are Moors. And when these people come before them making arguments, they can easily tell whether these people have been studying or not. Like when, it's sort of like they keep assuming that the hybrid Europeans don't know who they are. Many people keep assuming that the hybrid European forgot that he's a colonist. And that because he claims to be an American, that he's convinced that he's American and you're supposed to be convinced that he's American. And he operates from that perspective. And then when you hold him or her, to their obligations to the treaties and the Constitution, all of a sudden they get scramble-minded and start acting like they don't know what you're talking about or you don't know what you're talking about. But the real deal is they know that if you knew constitutional principles, you wouldn't be in that venue. And that you would, if you were forced into that venue, that you would challenge the jurisdiction with an averment of jurisdiction, or quo warranto, and command his obligation to the treaty, and it would automatically revert to a consular court via what Dwight D. Eisenhower suspended in 1954 when they introduced their 32 and 33 degree Mason civil rights marching guys and girls to deceive the people into the 14th Amendment fraud instead of telling them the proper venue was consular court that he suspended. Oh, nobody wants to go there, do they?
Which probably leads into Bantu Mendika's question of, so why haven't the Moors brought the government up on charges? The de facto government, I would say.
They have been on many fronts, but mostly we've been pretty much blocked from international venues. And we've been, most of the time, challenging their jurisdiction in the private for-profit human trafficking municipal venues, most of which we have been forced into, etc. However, most of the people, when they're making that statement, must also recognize that they themselves, while asking that question, are responsible to this along with us, and should have been with us and other active Moors in that support, because that's a necessary fact, which is also why over the years we've been struggling to get our people cognate of their true identity and status and their obligation to be involved into the divine and more national movement on the planet. I think too often they're looking for other people to be sacrificial lamb. This is part of the training, and do the work, and then they step on board and get the benefit after the fact, rather than jumping on board, because it's their responsibility too. I think this also comes from the misconception where people are looking at the Moorish movement as an idea of, or some club, or some people that are conscious, as opposed to being their responsibility. It's in their inheritance, their pedigree, their bloodline too. And I think this is also problematic, where many conscious Moors have been teaching or presenting the nationality as a religion, distinguished from the fact that that's a pedigree, and they also have an obligation to inheritances and to treaties that have not been exercised, which is what they see taking place. And that is their duty and responsibility to get on board and help. Don't look at the wagon, people struggling to push the wagon, get behind and push this wagon too, because it's yours too. It's your birthright. And a lot of people don't see it as their responsibility.
But when you think in terms of the fact that we're under occupation and have been for so long, it's as if in this time someone totally unknown to you or unrelated to you would just walk into where you domicile and take up residence and start to order you around and legislate how things are going to go.
This is what they've been doing.
And take your stuff.
That's exactly what they've been doing. Now, exactly what you're saying. Now look at this. This is one to show the people, to demonstrate just what you're saying. This is why we talk to people to get an idea of what your position should be in the political forum. We remind people to read the Organic Act of Congress, 1871, February 2nd. We also recommend them to do the research on the Woodrow Wilson administration, excerpt 1913. Then we also represent to them to read House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session June the 5th of 1933. And it becomes very obvious what the politics are really, that's really operating on the land is. And also to study intently the word and the application of hypothecation. And also in recognizing the operation of the skull and bone operators of the Circle Church and the Chancery via Franklin Delano Roosevelt with pledging the birth certificates as bonds to refund the again bankrupted U.S. corporation operations, United States, etc. And this would pretty much become obvious to everyone, the politics. And what I recognize that while we've been sharing this information with people for 40 years or more, that people keep looking at it as our information or like our ideas rather than this is established fact. And this is where your economic and political problems have their origin. Yours as well as ours. It's not ours that we're informing you of. It is all of our problems, economic and political, that we've been suffering from, and then calling it other things falsely, like racism and prejudice, when you're actually under occupation. You're suffering under the doctrine of discovery and unum sanctum operations. That's the fact. Take responsibility and help get this work done. Because remember, their position is, if you don't declare a right, from their position, although it's immoral and unethical, they hold truthfully, openly, and by policy. Any rights not claimed by the people are abandoned, and they claim them as fiduciaries. And so not only do they use birth certificates to fund by bonds the United States Corporation Company, but also all marriage certificates and all licenses and CDLs, etc., are bonded and sold as derivatives on the world market. This is part of what has frozen up now. And the nations of the earth are no longer buying them. They tried, as a matter of fact, they tried, I think a couple of years ago, just before Trump came in, to refund the United States again, I think around 2013, when the Pope Francis did, as many of you who have been keeping up with what we've been sharing with you over the years, the motu proprio issued by Pope Francis in 2013 when the United States went bankrupt again, and they told them they weren't going to buy any more of their bonds that were leaned against the people's birth certificates. This is another reason why no one wants to talk about the crash that took place in late 2007 and 2008 is subsistent to what is going on right now. They never fixed it. That's the fact. And it's just that the credit windows and the trade windows of the world have frozen up. And the other fact, Donald J. Trump is using the Zionist order of the Federal Reserve according to their operations, and it was absorbed into the IMF, i.e. the U.S. Treasury, which is actually the International Monetary Fund, and he's issuing the debt against the banks. It's why they don't like him, because he's using their very stuff against them.
Is he also trying to preserve some pensions?
Because it would see, this is what would happen. And again, I don't want you all to get this twisted. I'm not defending Donald Trump. If Donald Trump hadn't been using the Jesuit or Zionist order operation of the banks, their own system against themselves, many of you who had pensions would not be receiving any pension checks right now today. Now that's the truth, even though it's still colored. And if you notice that the stock market is going up, but jobs is going down, it also clearly shows you there's no correlation whatsoever. But when they talk to the people, They talk to the people as if the stock market is a representation of the gross national product and of the economic operations on the land. The operations of the stock market constantly going up, drops a little bit and then goes back up, drops a little bit and goes back up. Then gold and silver goes down, etc. And the people don't notice that there's no correlation, that the entire situation, the operations of their economic system is totally, absolutely manipulated. And that the stock market and the employment, etc., has no relationship whatsoever. Also notice that all of your major corporations, i.e. sort of like the Gates Foundation and other foundations, have exponentially generated billions of dollars in these last few months when the so-called COVID thing comes in, and all of the people and their accounts have gone the opposite direction, and the people don't recognize that there's a correlation in the fact that there's no correlation between the stock market and the economics of the people. A lot of things would be what you would answer yourself if you pay attention to things. Don't pay attention to what the politicians say. Pay attention to what's happening to you. And I'm also not saying that that's totally terrible, because in another way, it's sort of like they're still fighting over your estate. That's what you really need to know. And the other fact that governments don't have money. They steal yours. It's why it's important for them to put up that fake premise that, or convince the people that they're U.S. citizens, not knowing that that when they agree to that, you understand there's no naturalization. Ask yourself this. Present anyone that you know, and you can actually have them come on and make their comments on our venue at the House of Reawakening Minds. Show when any of these people of African descent who keep claiming to be U.S. citizens, show their naturalization papers and show evidence of them going through the nationalization process, etc. And I guarantee you they won't, because it never happened. They were not, cannot, and will never be U.S. citizens, although they can claim it. But they use your claim to actually create more bonds. This is why you see them desperately running troops. They run around all over the place, banging on people's doors, asking them to sign a census. That's why they're doing it.
Yesterday, the deadline?
It doesn't matter. They're bankrupt. They're dissolved. They've been dissolved. Let's look. Let's look at this again. You know, you all need to really get some clarity on what's going on here. I'm going to read something else to you. You'll notice how New York City right now is boarded up, even areas where they didn't have so-called peaceful riots under Antifa, that is disguised as the Black Lives Matter movement. Number 11, quote unquote, New York City is defined in federal regulations as, quote unquote, the United Nations. New York City is, quote unquote, the capital of the world. See 20, Council on Foreign Relations, Chapter 111, Subpart B, 44.103, Subsection B, 2 and 2. There you go. You better wake up. Hold on. I'm going to give me another one. Give you another one. And for you who are arguing about Trump, and I not that I'm defending Trump again, because these people keep twisting things around. Social Security numbers, I know a lot of y'all depend on that, particularly since you ain't got no jobs. You've been thrown off the plantation. Social Security numbers are issued by the United Nations through the International Monetary Fund. And the application for a Social Security number is the SS5 form. The Department of the Treasury / International Monetary Fund issued the Social Security Fund forms, SS5 forms, and not the Social Security Administration. The new SS5 forms do not state who publishes them, while the old forms state they are from the Department of the Treasury. See 20 Council on Foreign Relations, Chapter 111, Subpart B, 422.103, Subsection B. Thank you very much. Do some studying. I'll give you something else. Y'all really need to really start doing some civic studies. The United States does not have any employees because there is no longer a legitimate United States. There shall be no more reorganizations. After 200 years of bankruptcy, it is finally over and dissolved. See Executive Order 12803. Repeat, see Executive Order 12803. So now, again, the more you understand the real politics, the more you understand why they're fighting Trump for cleaning out the house of the corruption. Not necessarily because he's a good guy, because the world won't trade with them anymore. And don't think that you're going back to your JOBs if half this stuff is not solved by Trump. That's the truth.
Okay, I have just
Go ahead.
an epiphany. It may be way out the
Epiphanography.
It may be out the lunch.
Yeah.
Okay. But 9/11, when it actually happened, I saw the towers as a symbolic of 11, which is a master number. And
Yeah.
you just said that the New York is the
Capital of the world.
Of the world is also the United Nations of the capital of the world. The Twin Towers represent the 11 or the master number. The strike on the towers took place on September 9/11. It took 9 years.
Yes.
Later, it took. I mean, what I mean. It took till. I'm talking about that. It took till 2000, if you will, not 9 years, but it took till 2000, right, for that actually to fall. We thought the towers, when the towers went down, that was the collapse, but it didn't. It was teeter-tottering, if you will, precariously with all kinds of things. Like you said, 2007, 2008 came, and all the the various things, and they kept doing things to keep it propped up.
And
but
keep this in
now,
mind.
in 2020, in our clear vision, now we see that it has now collapsed.
And people already know that it was an inside job. They didn't want to believe that. They really want to believe that somebody brought them down with a box cutter in a cave in Afghanistan, wherever. Hold on. The other deal of it is, people pretend not to recognize the documented record, that 2 months before that they doubled the insurance on all those buildings, including that other building with that 7th floor that fell down. Oh, the plane missed that, but it fell down anyway later. And then they accused bin Laden of hiding in an alley doing it. And then some pilots who were trained Muslims, they threw their IDs out the window and everything else burnt, but they didn't burn.
Yeah. The ID, yeah.
And then Bush's brother and cousin, somebody found it, whatever. Please. People know their...
Bush is reading a book to the children upside downwards.
Yeah.
Waiting for the call.
Not just that. Keep in mind, not only did they double the insurance a couple months just before the buildings, also, people don't want to keep pretending they don't know that ambassadors came from Germany asking for their gold. Those same 2 months before, when they raised the so-called insurance on all those, doubled up. And they told them to take a walk. Then, remember, after that, then they went and raided Libya and stole Gaddafi's gold to give some gold to Germany. So people keep on forgetting a sequence of events.
That's called robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Exactly. And so with Gaddafi, remember he was helping to put that satellite up to take Africa and the Asiatic states from under the thumb of the Rockefellers and the Gates Foundation, etc. And so they wouldn't be subject to Google and all the rest of the stuff. And that was another reason they took Gaddafi out.
We would have had a different platform.
You daggone right. And now they can censor any information. Mm-hmm. See, people don't put all those things together. Not because they can't. I think a lot of people don't want to. You know how, like you were talking earlier, a lot of people play dumb and say that they're not aware of certain things, but when you really analyze it, it's not that they don't want to accept the truth because they don't want to admit that they've been hypocrites or part of the problem. Another one, number 6. The FCC, the CIA, the FBI, NASA, and all the other alphabet soup agencies and gangs were never a lawful part of the United States government, even though, quote unquote, the United States government, through its trustees and representatives, held stock in these foreign agencies. See United States versus Strang, U.S. 491, Lewis versus U.S. 680, F. 2nd, 1239. And so these so-called trustees and representatives actually hold stock in the FCC, the CIA, the FBI, and NASA. Do you notice how the people never benefit from none of these organizations, and anything of importance they hide from the people? And yet these people keep on doing things to the people that cause injury to the people. But the people keep thinking that these alphabet soup organizations are part of, quote unquote, their government. This stuff is all documented, and the people I think want to be naive. They just don't want to believe that these people are really anti-constitutional, and that you're being governed over by people who are not your legitimate government and never were. Hard nut to swallow, hard truth for a lot of people to accept. However, it is the truth.
I'm trying to get this. Is that the United 254 U.S. 491? You just gave.
What we just read?
1921. Strang 254.
This is versus Strang, U.S. 491, Lewis versus U.S. 680. Yes.
Okay, I just want to put.
Yes, and then you all can do please take notes and do research so that as we're sharing information over these years, that a lot of truths and facts that we present over to you via the House of Reawakening Minds, so you can do some research and become aware of these things yourselves. It's not our information. It belongs to all of you. And keep in mind, you're responsible to this. And also, you'll understand why Noble Drawley told the Moors that if they failed to enforce the law, that we were going to suffer. And here we go. And I suggest that if many of the people who have been claiming to be sheiks and sheikesses under the leadership of Noble Drawley, if they had carried out the law as he declared, a lot of these problems that we're suffering from now would not be on our backs. And that's a fact. But you hear some of them being trolls against people who have been trying to tell you the truth for years. A lot of them are trolls because they don't want people to pay attention to the fact that many of them have been traitors. It's unfortunate, but it's self-evident.
Columbus Dunn says, should we be getting some gold or silver and getting rid of this fiat? You've been saying that for years.
See, this is the point. While you're under occupation, you've been forced to use the fiat, or like Drawley said, they're going to try to starve you out. And as you all know, pardon me, Dr. Naila has been suggesting to you all, while you're able to at least get some silver so that you can help survive the transitions that are absolutely being made. And it's not a matter of belief. This is a matter of fact. That is the money. And if you have gold, you're not going to trade the gold. You'll use that as an insurance. But the silver you will actually use in transactional trade, because that is the money.
What about the fact that it seems that they're moving towards maybe a digital?
Because they're still trying to maintain power.
Right, because they could subtract anytime they want.
What they're trying to do, let's look at every time they try to do something or what they say. Always measure it against the Constitution. Article 1, Section 10, the Constitution for the United States state that no state shall emit any bills of credit or coin anything but gold or silver coin for payment of debt. And you can read that out. Please read that out every time somebody tells you about anything, saying that anything else is the money. And I'm not saying don't do these things. I'm not saying one thing or another. I'm saying what the money is and what people keep telling you that it isn't.
I'll put it here.
Because remember, they've been doing the digital currency for 40, 50 years already. It's just that they introduced it to the public now so they could still maintain control over your resources. Because it's easier for them to blank out your computer and a card that you have with digits than it was even to take the physical fiat. So take all that in consideration. So I'm not telling you what to do or not to do. I'm telling you use your common sense. Because remember, in contract law, substance for substance. And the other rule relative to money, silver and gold, coins, Yakimthaler, pardon me. If you don't have it in your hand, you don't have it. Tell me how many digital coins, which is an oxymoron, can you put in a jar? How many of them can you put in your pocket? How many can you hold in your hand? How many can you hold in your hand? Show, look, Dr. Nayo, look how much digital coins I got.
Yeah, a whole bunch.
You know, they'll have a convenient blackout and then all your stuff in your computer and your cards go away. And don't think that's not what they plan, because that's exactly what they plan. However, I'm also not saying don't use it. I already know the game. But you need to start using your common sense. Rule in contract law. Substance for substance. And if anybody that knows any contract law that contradicts that, state it for the record. Not by your opinion, but by fact of law of contract. National or international. Ancient or modern. You know, look at this, Dr. Nail. You remember what we were talking about earlier? Right? A certain company, a certain organization or company, under the guise of misrepresenting you, actually stole $1,900 from your account. A company, we were talking earlier, stole $1,900, $88 and almost 2,000 notes. Right. Now, I want to point this out to you. If even with fiat, if that physical fiat was in your pocketbook, would they have been able to do that? No, unless they physically came and robbed you. Right. And it's still fiat. However, they were able to do it because it was what? Digital. If they can do 1988, even without you, you had to find it out. And guess what? If you didn't go through hell and high water to complain, you would have been out of it. What does that tell you? The capacity of the operations with a dishonorable governing body, which they already multiple times proven to be dishonorable, 1900 could also be 91.
Right.
And guess what? At the same time, while you file and other people file complaints, right? Everybody's is not answered, and everybody does not get remedy.
That's right.
Intelligence tells you. Now they're both forms of fiat. However, do you really recognize them being bankrupt while they're doing this census so hard? Doing this, they're running hard on this census, and the people don't know that they're bankrupt and that all government offices and departments have been legally dissolved. Dissolved. What does legally dissolved mean?
It means it no longer is valid or it's no longer.
So how, on what basis of law are they taxing people? And this has been since 1933.
What's fraud?
Of course it is. So why do you think they want to get these people on digital transfers now?
It's easier for them to rob.
It's easier to rob you and to tax you that way than it was before, and before it was already a fraud. So now they are limitless.
What I heard they would even do in this instance is potentially have a limit on your a time limit for you to spend.
They can limit, so they're forcing you.
If you haven't spent in a second, like now we say
it disappears.
It disappears.
What does that tell you? No, they're telling you.
Yeah.
Now, hold on. So right now, whenever somebody tells the truth,
you also know every transaction that you now handle.
Exactly.
They know when you pay the boy to cut your grass. Or
exactly.
Whatever happens is
not only that. If you tell any truths about the corruption, they push a button and all of your stuff disappears. The same way that the different CIA platforms, Twitter, Google, Facebook, etc., are demonetizing people who have already been thrown off their jobs, and they are working hard themselves, being creative, and with their intellectual operations are generating finance. What do? Push a button and demonetize them. Push a button and do what? Freeze their accounts. Isn't that called digital? Oh, how far do we need to go with this conversation? Substance for substance, y'all. Contract law. In contract law principles, there shall be no vaguity. That means legitimate contracts cannot be vague or misleading. 2, substance for substance. 3, a minor or minority, i.e., cannot make valid contract, etc. The parties in the contract must be of lawful and legal age and competent and mentally stable, etc. And that's just a few points. But mainly, substance. Is substance digital? Is substance abstract?
No.
Digital is abstract. That's a violation of contract law. At what point do people not recognize when they're being introduced to another fraud on top of a fraud because the first fraud failed them? It failed you. It benefited them. And now that the people caught on, they're presenting to you digital so they can steal the rest of your stuff and still maintain power over your lives. As a matter of fact, you'll be more locked down now than you were before. Substance for substance, you all. Everybody keeps trying to avoid treaty law and constitution, aren't they? Aren't they? So how are these people who are not constitutional going to make laws that is authorized under constitutional vested authority? Duh. They don't even recognize that these people are openly admitting that they're not only traitors, that they're criminal. It's not an issue of whether it works or not. It's an issue that is clear criminality. Substance for substance, y'all. Self-government is the major method by which you dismiss them and do not consent to them being fofers or trustees over your estate. That's a fact. So to govern yourself, you must know yourself. That's for one. To govern over yourself lawfully, you must recognize the treaties and laws that existed before you were born by virtue of your foreparents, etc., your forefathers. And you better specifically name them, and you better be harmonic with your pedigree and bloodline, because you can't use those treaties and constitutions if you're not a party to them. Why do you think Noble Drew Ali said to these Moors, if you don't do anything else, declare your nationality? When you analyze law of contracts and covenants on the planet, you'll recognize why he said it. But you also recognize those who were traitors against him don't teach civics. Even though it's an established fact that the Moorish Temple of Science was registered as a civic organization, and then you'll see people who claim to be authorities under the authority of Noble Drew Ali will keep telling you that he didn't teach civics, lying to your faces. Lying to your faces. And then you'll understand why many people aren't aware of this information we're sharing with you now when it should have been common knowledge. Common knowledge.
Roxy Day says, how is the Treaty of Peace and Friendship relevant in these times in the context of commerce?
Because it is commerce. The Treaty of Peace and Friendship is the longest running treaty operating on the land, etc. in modern times. That's a fact. So for someone to be operating in any venue or international, they're operating under rules of trade, international, and those trades and international commerce or international communications come under consular venues of treaties. That's a fact all over the world. That's the platform. That's the venue. Has there been a constitutional convention by which these treaties or constitution were dissolved? And if they were not, that's the law of the land. This is why Drew Ali said in the Divine Warning to the Nations, he said what? That constitution 1774 has never changed. Why? Because there's never been a constitutional convention. They stand as a supreme law of the land. And even to change them, then you're going to have the descendants of those people, i.e., are the only ones have the authority to dissolve it. They're in perpetuity until such time takes place. So now you got a lot of conscious Moors, and we're not going along with the BS, are we? A lot of people are upset now, aren't they? Why? Because we discovered that they've been operating in a state of misprision. See, as long as they had you under the Christian black codes, going around calling yourself crayons, I know some light-skinned green people, and then some dark-skinned, orange-skinned black people, but then the white, purple people don't matter what color you are, and then we have rights under the Constitution. You're not a party to it. Stop. Get over it. Stop playing. It's not in your interest to continue BSing.
There's a question or a comment.
And I'll share another one with you.
Okay.
Number 8. There are no lawful judicial courts operating under the jurisdiction of the United States Corporation doing business at North America. Lawful courts have not been in existence since 1789. Article 3 judges do not enforce statutes and codes. Executive administrators enforce statutes and codes. See FRC versus GE 281 US 464 Keller versus PE 261 U.S. 428 1 Statute 138-178 as a point of reference, and you'll find other cases in relationship, because that one case will lead you to another, and you'll recognize that there are no Article 3 judges. Now do you see why conscious Moors are enforcing the treaties via Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution for the United States, which leads back to the treaties, diversity of nationality? Consular court is the venue. And just because they are fraud don't mean that we are. We're standing on the law while they're standing on fraud and under a color of law. That's why you see a lot of people all upset as soon as Moors say anything about consular venues, which is the established law. The established law. I.e., that's called treaty. And when someone denied consular venue, they're denying the treaty enforcements. But they know that most of these people are ignorant, so they make those statements, and they've been getting away with it because the people have not been taught civics. Well, we're just telling you the facts of what you should have been told decades ago. As a matter of fact, you should have been given this information in the 3rd grade.
Sean Power said there was an old techie movie where the computer would steal pennies from bank accounts in compounded amounts. Now, do you want to round up?
Isn't that digital? Isn't that digital?
We don't have any change from your dollar bills, so we'll keep the 2 cents or 7 cents. Or
you see them even now in the stores saying, "Do you want your change?" What do you mean? How about if you say to them, "That's $4.98. Do you want me to give you the 98 cents?" They'd look at you cross-eyed, wouldn't they? Tell me how many times you go to these different stores, corporate store venues, and they have a bucket there and they talk about, "Would you like to contribute to the Children's Pimple Fund?" With all these different funds that they've been collecting for children and cancer and everything for decades, where's any of the poverty solved? Do you see more broken families now than you ever did? Do you see any more broken homes and single women trying to struggle to raise children in broken homes with all these funds and all these people caring about the children and collecting all these funds? And then the administrators have plane expenses triple, 6-figure compensation plus other golden parachute venues, and you see the poverty continue. Perfect example. Look what they bombed Haiti to get a gold contract for some political president's brother, and it wasn't granted. So all of a sudden Haiti had a tsunami bomb, a bomb planted in the water near Haiti, and people collected billions upon billions of dollars for the Haitian people to help restore Haiti, and they built about 20 buildings there. As a matter of fact, Jimmy Carter helped do some of them, and the people are still poor, and they were stealing children. Yeah. Epstein's Island. Y'all still going for the BS? According to GATT, G-A-T-T, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, you must have a Social Security number. See House Report 103-926. So they're forcing people into the International Monetary Fund, making them think that it is a fund available to them by some insurance policy by which they themselves have been taxed, and taxes have been taken from them, and the fact that no fund exists whatsoever. And the politicians that you keep thinking are your government have been robbing it and sending it to or some nation state that was established in 1948. They're all Zionists. I don't know why you all haven't caught on yet. I think people know, but they just don't want to accept the truth. It's hard. However, now they've thrown you off the plantations because the world won't trade with them. I think many of you better start getting serious and getting educating yourself in a lot of these reality facts. And back, one of the things we were talking about earlier, in the car. Number 14, you own, emphasized, no property under the U.S. democracy, period. Slaves cannot own property, period. Read carefully the deed assigned to the property that you have been duped into thinking is yours. You will note that you have been listed as a tenant on that misrepresented document. See Senate Document 43, 73rd Congress, First Session. 15. The most powerful court in the United States of America is not the United States Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. See 42 PA CSA 502. "16. The King of England financially backed both sides of the conflict in the American Revolutionary War. See Treaty of Versailles, July the 16th, 1782. Treaty of Peace, 8, Statute 80. And we've got plenty more for you. These are just simply fundamentals. So you all want to sit up here and argue about the Democratic and Republican Party, both which are Whig-Moore party split. Two sides of the same coin of anti-constitutionalist and anti-republic order, battling over your estate, and the treasuries against the Moors, i.e. people of African descent, was set forth in 1861 after they murdered Lincoln. It's called the coup d'etat of 1861, March 27th. This is why the Pope of Rome, Pope Francis, informed all of you with a letter written directly to Barack H. Obama and stated about the fraud that took place over 150 years ago, and that the bond system used for the United States to fund the United States Corporation was based on the enslavement of the descendants of Africans falsely tagged as African Americans. Now that's the fact. Now nations want to buy those treasury bonds anymore, and it appears that the United States Corporation is having a problem. Well, how about you all declaring your nationality and killing the rest of those bonds, rather than trying to get back on the job? Because remember, the U.S. Corporation Company has been dissolved. I think many of you forgot when Pope Francis had that meeting with the motu proprio, what he called so-called religious leaders from around the world and political leaders, and they promised to cease and desist operating the doctrine of discovery, which is what you've been falsely calling racism and prejudice. That's really what you've been suffering from. And now, so you have a rebellion amongst themselves. So now the Whig-Moore party is fighting among themselves between the Cotton Whigs and the Conscience Whigs that you're calling the Republican and the Democratic Party, pretending that you don't know the history. Pretending that you don't know the history. So they need more stock. So somebody be knocking on your door. Yeah, want to sign this census and shit? So they can create more stock. However, they've been dissolved. So who do you think you're dealing with? A rogue operation of corporations, known as the United States Corporation Company, that has been dissolved.
We're seeing the connections with the over the last 10 months. You now see how many things are actually connected.
Of course.
That you thought were individual corporations or individual operations. You thought
given different names.
Was entertainment, there was sports,
they're
there was
all
education, there
intertwined.
was media, there was government. Now you see it's all one big.
They're all connected.
Absolutely.
You know what's really happening? This is another thing that's happening, and you all pay attention to this. The problem that they're having is when the nations of the earth stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds, they could no longer float the bonds. And so you'll see, this is for all of you who think that we're just talking ideas. Look in New York and do a research on how many building booms, that's those big booms that you see building those big buildings. See how many of them have reduced in the last year compared to the year before in San Francisco, in Seattle, in New York, and many of your major cities that have been operating under the Ku Klux Klan Democratic Party, and see how many of them booms have come down because they can't float bonds. And so they're acting like, well, we can't send the children to school and shit because of COVID-19. Well, the real deal is they don't have the funding and they can't float the bonds. You better start looking at international venues and look at the fact that the trade windows have frozen up. And as I reminded many of you 7 years ago, and re-emphasized about 3 years ago, pay attention to Deutsche Bank in Germany, which is really the CIA's dumping ground for the trade and the derivatives that have been hidden through there by congressmen and senators with their offshore accounts, and all the so-called mortgages of most of the dead pledges that have been operating and bundled at North America are actually housed or controlled under the Deutsche Bank in Germany. Do a little research, y'all. You're being played big time. And you're not poor right now by accident. It's not by accident whatsoever. And you're thinking about voting for these criminals? Keep it up. Have fun with your own estate being liquidated. '22. The Pope of Rome claims to own the entire planet Earth, Midgard, through the laws of conquest and discovery. See Papal Bulls of 1495 and 1493. There we go. So are you all suffering from racism, or are you suffering from the papal bulls of the Roman Catholic Church? Because they own Britain and they own the U.S. corporation that went bankrupt again in 2013.
Oh, Canada.
Well, you know, the things that the people should be discussing, they're not discussing. And the things that they shouldn't be discussing, they're begging, we fought and died for the right to vote against ourselves. Duh. It's really interesting. And again, some of you, and I'll repeat this, is number 13. And for some of you and your parents who've been thrown off the Jobs, check your Social Security checks. So your Social Security checks come directly from the International Monetary Fund, which is an agency of the United Nations. And back to what Dr. Naila was saying earlier, they hide a lot of these venues under different names when they're actually all connected. So when you see the Social Security operations, it is the IMF. And when you see the IMF, you're looking at the United Nations. So C, Social Security check states, the U.S. Department of Treasury. So you see that the Social Security Administration, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, and the U.S. Department of Treasury are all one and the same entity. And you'll find the U.S. Department of Treasury at the top left corner of the Social Security check, which is again a part of the United Nations. That's a fact. But learn how to do some cross references, y'all.
Please, Dr. G, mention November 7th.
Say it again.
Somebody's asked me to mention November 7th, 2020 Embassy. Abdullah Mosi Bay location, please. I don't have that information.
Yep.
It's not.
I didn't get it.
They're asking about United Republic, but I don't have that information.
Oh, they're talking about when
For Abdullah, and
yes.
mentioned, but I don't have the details.
Yes, go on the sites and look at it. You'll see the flyer
On their,
they have on their site. Yes.
Yeah, on their site. So.
Yes, on Saturday. Yeah.
Who was it? I'm just trying to see if there's. I'm trying to go back up to questions move so fast.
And again, like it's number 3, and this is in relationship to the IMF and the United States Treasury and the Department of Treasury, they all being one and the same. The United States has not had a treasury since 1921. And you can see that at Chapter 41, Statute 214, page 654. So, they are actually stealing from the people, sending it to so-called foreign nations aid to foreign nations, which are really where they have in private accounts for themselves. And then they're claiming their own private theft as being the national debt. Number 1, they're not a nation. Number 2, they're a private corporation, and that corporation has been dissolved. So who do you think is forcing you to pay taxes? I don't need to tell you, you start thinking about all these people that you keep talking about voting for.
This is interesting. Let me see if I can find it again.
You better think about governing yourself.
Dre Workins says most Moors never even been to Africa. Shaking my head. That's not true.
You're standing on
we're
Africa.
In Africa. We're in.
You're standing on Africa.
We're here.
There you go. Northwest Africa.
Right here. Wow. Just trying to see. Someone says U.S.
That's really what they're telling you in The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
They're really telling you that. You're home already, Dorothy. You've been played. You bumped your head.
Aubrey Cameron says, what do you think about the lie that Second Amendment rights protection is our rights, but law enforcement does not honor any of the law?
Now, aren't we talking about the Organic Act of Congress 1871, February 2nd, where the Congress set up the U.S. democracy to steal the existing rights of the people? Because remember, Constitution don't give you rights; they secure rights that already exist. The Constitution's existence is just an affirmation of rights that already exist. See, the concept that the Constitution gives people rights is a wrong concept. The constitutions in place to keep persons who are governing in check. Concept, civics. Just like governments don't have money, governments don't have rights or liberties to sell you or to grant to you. They have an obligation to secure those rights. And when they breach those obligations, they have no right to even talk to you. That's more tell you what you can or cannot have. Our concepts about this whole operations of treaty and constitutions have been incorrect.
Mohez P. March says in England, they made it so that if you do not sign the consensus, I guess that would be the census.
Isn't that called arbitrary?
They threaten you with a large fine in
so
the thousands.
Isn't that called arbitrary? Again, they're telling you that they're criminal. Governments are instituted by people, by the governed. How does somebody, a so-called employee, of course that's a fraud, or so-called public servant tell you that you owe them more finance than you even can generate yourself, and if you don't, they're going to F you up. And then you call them your government. Do you see how people have been actually trained that they really don't understand what government is or what government is not? And the more and more you look at things that are going on, you recognize people really do not have a basic, fundamental study in civics that has been actually fostered among the people. The people actually think that government is arbitrary, rather than recognizing that they're organized rogue criminals. And as a matter of fact, whenever some politicians even make a statement like that, issue a quo warranto and show where they derived that authority in the first place, and you won't find it because it doesn't exist. No different than somebody walking up and you're at ATM, somebody walk up on you and says, take out all the fiat and give it to me or I'm going to shoot you. It's exactly the same thing. Tell me where it's different.
So, Darren Logan asks if you can please talk about the Buck Act.
The Buck Act? Oh, where they are taxing everyone. Look up the Buck Act. And this is where they're taxing you unlawfully. And it was mainly directed at our people, basically.
And what did...
yeah.
Where did those who have... Louis Anthony May L says, where do those who have jobs get their pay from?
They don't get... See, this is back to the point. Let's Article 1, Section 10. No court shall issue any bills of credit or make anything but gold or silver coin for payment in debt. Have any of you been paid in silver or gold, which is the money? If you haven't, you have not been paid. See House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session, June the 5th, 1933, i.e., with the U.S. bankruptcy. Also, the fact that all departments of the U.S. corporation have been dissolved. Now tell by law anyone that you know who's ever been paid. And so the concept that you being paid is a false concept in the first place.
So Master God Squad asks, what papers are needed to set up your own business as a Moor?
Your divine right is called nationalization and the restoration of your estate. This is why we always tell people do a reversion of estate. And this is again why we're talking about self-government. See, the people keep looking to the dissolved operatives of the rogue state corporation called the United States for remedy. They're not the remedy, they're the problem. And then you go and ask them for permission to exercise a right that already exists with you. And then you sign up and give your rights to them to regulate over you. People don't understand what nationalization means. Study carefully what nationalization means. Also, study carefully what naturalization means. And also study the word called in law called arbitrary.
Jan K. Smith says, is Boricua the nationality for Mexicans? Heard we're Moors too, but I seen that Moor is dark-skinned people. I'm light-skinned, straight, wavy hair. I don't look Moor or Albion. This is confusing.
If you're Mexican, you're still a Moor. If you're Mexican, all you need to do is do research in Mexican history, and they'll tell you, your foreparents will tell you that you're Moors. Olmec is Moors. Old Mexum. That's what Olmec is. You know, when the hybrid conquered the Moors, they even have a song. They call the songs under the Moorines. They call it From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli. They'll fight their country's battles. Ha! They took over. Get the point? What do you think Montezuma is?
Montezuma.
The Yucatan. Modern Mexico.
Inner City News says, how many Moors do we need to petition a class action lawsuit? I'm not sure about what.
Isn't the fact that you're becoming conscious that's already a plebiscite to the world? See, we are trying to get our people cleaned up in the state of mind of stop asking the occupier for rights, which he will never give, that he has none to give in the first place. You must declare your right. It's called nationalization. The state of mind. See, it's sort of like, this is where the conflict comes when I tell you, Dr. Naila, a lot of people come into these venues looking for remedies, and their conversation, i.e. state of mind, is contradictory. They're still thinking like a subject, but trying to act like a sovereign. They talk from a subjected position. It's like somebody asking you, Dr. Naila, where can we make sign the application for the right to see what time it is on my watch? That mentality. You see, that mentality is part of what must be cleaned up.
Inner City News also asks, let me go above that. Marvin Mays, why have you all not put this in the USA Today newspaper? Like they would let that be put in.
The question is self-evident.
I know.
I
just had to read it.
Yeah, but it's good. It's good. But I'm just, because it's something for us to think about. See the state of mind.
Yeah, and maybe not.
And it's not intended to be negative.
But I know it's not. But from a standpoint of USA Today, it would be like
that belongs to
them. So
Zionists.
I'm going to expose you in your
like
own
the Zionists. Look how even that. Look how many, particularly in more recent weeks and months, people who have shared information from around the world, even on the internet, and been shut down. What makes you think they're going to take information against themselves and publish it in their papers that they controlled?
That's what I'm saying.
Why do you think they burned down Tulsa, Oklahoma, which had the wealthiest bank on the land still controlled by Moors? Why do you think the infiltrators into the Moorish Divine and National Movement tore down Noble Drew Ali's printing presses? that he has established for the Moors, for the Moorish Monitor and the Moorish Guide. And Drew Ali said, this is our most powerful weapon in the hand of our group, our own press. Do you hear about any of the Moors in the temples talking about Noble Drew Ali's press, the Monitor and the Moorish Guide? And he owned the press and millions of dollars backed by gold for the Moors, and it was stolen. And it's called the Great Sellout that nobody wants to talk about. And then they're talking about, how come the Courier Post don't tell us this stuff? How come the New York Times, Horace Greeley, tell us this stuff? Whiggamore Party? Come on, y'all. Let's stop playing dumb. But these same people keep building churches, mosques, and synagogues, don't they? And going into debt, won't they? But do they set up their own press? But they buy Gucci pocketbooks and stuff. I mean, it's really interesting when you study.
Well, Interesting News says, Taj, how do we go about getting our own banks, airports, and hospitals and function?
Isn't that why you see the Moors being active, trying against multiple levels of resistance among their own and from the hybrid Europeans of the corporation, United States corporation, bankrupt corporation, keep claiming jurisdiction that they do not have and doing everything they can to block us at every corner, and yet we've been consistent. We've been consistent for years, and how many people you'll hear saying, well, he's saying the same thing he said before. The truth is nothing else to say but the truth.
That's right.
It doesn't come in versions, but you must act on it. It's said over redundantly because you're not acting. You're not responding. Some are, very few. But until the people respond to the truth, it is what? It's abandoned, isn't it? How many people in relationship to things like this are self-government? How many people, how many so-called conscious people, conscious Moors and unconscious Moors, will bring up the dissolution of colonial governments with the as presented to the world with the Special Committee of 24 since 1960? It's not even in their conversation. But yet we bring it up, and you see even some Moors saying, why are they talking about consular court? We're presenting to you the proper forms, but you must act on it. We can't do it just by ourselves. It's everybody's responsibility. You know, like people keep saying, we're not going to help pick the cotton, and we ain't picking no tomatoes, and we ain't picking no beans, and we ain't picking no vegetables. But we are going to ask you how you cooking that cabbage, what kind of season you using, and when you going to cook. Who got the paper plates? Now, do you understand how the hybrid European responds to our people when our people come to talk about treaties and constitution? Like he's going to sit up and say, oh, dang, man, y'all finally caught us. Oh, we're going to act right now. Where's my suitcase? No, it's not going to happen like that.
Daniel Cordina says, need courage, a brain, and a heart. So where's the vibe?
Aren't these same people that keep going into services and going to other countries in the name of liberty and freedom? They brave then, ain't they? They go on firing ranges, learn how to use weapons and everything, and talking about liberties and country and God and everything. And then in the venue of their own rights, they talk about, yeah, but if I declare my rights, ain't they gonna steal our peanut butter sandwiches and the rest of our lunch? You notice how when faced with real reality that the people keep abandoning all their beliefs and all their so-called gods that have always so-called saved them? You ever notice that really? And it never dawns on them that they're telling the world who their real God is? They keep forgetting about the Allahs and the Prophet Muhammad's and the Jesuses. If we declare our rights, how are we going to declare our rights when they're not going to recognize it? You see the kind of conversations. Now, do you think that them executive administrators don't recognize people when they're not sure of their position? When the people are not sincerely tied to recognizing their own liberties, but they're asking another man to recognize their liberties and rights? As if another man has the rights and liberties to give them. When the man recognizes immediately, when you come at them thinking that they're going to give you rights and liberties, that they already know that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And if you're in a state of wardship, they're going to treat you like a ward. Particularly when they got bonds on you. They're not going to tell you, you can't come in speaking like a ward, talking about ownership of an estate. You can't be an executor of an estate that you yourself don't even recognize. And then come making demands to a third party interloper.
And even after you transition, they still...
Because that Social Security is the International Monetary Fund. It's a bond against your estate. The estate lives even when you physically die.
Check my mother's the Social Security that was assigned to my mother within the last few years.
Now,
and she's been going...
Back up and state that again. Because the people can understand that.
My mother transitioned in 2002. I want to say it was around 2013 or 14 that I found about that GMEI.org site. When I put her Social Security number assigned to her in it, I saw that they're still, even as early as last year, like I said, still trading or whatever off of her Social Security number.
Now.
There were over 11,000 entries in places in
11,000
all over the world.
All right.
And local.
Now, all right. Here we go again. Number 7. When you understand this, you understand that. In your mind, and in the mind of many people, they keep saying, my possessive Social Security.
That's the one assigned to her.
Yeah. But no, I'm just saying, the concept of the people's mind is that Social Security is with you, and when you die, it dies. No.
It does not.
It's a claim on your estate. 7. Social Security numbers are issued by the United Nations through the International Monetary Fund. The application for a Social Security number is the SS5 form. The Department of the Treasury, which is the IMF, issues the SS5 forms, and not the Social Security Administration. The new SS5 forms do not state who publishes them, while the old forms state they are from the Department of the Treasury. See 20, Council on Foreign Relations. You see all these are tied together? Mm-hmm. It's a bond against your life and your estate. When you die, they already have insurance on you. They not only collect insurance on you, the Social Security number is a claim against your estate that exists before you were born and after you were born. The number is a routing number for the Zionist order of the Federal Reserve Bankers, bench of the Pope.
But I heard that the Mormon Church keeps a list of all births and so forth, and
they're part of the game.
Yeah.
They're claiming to be you, more men. You know, if people would pay it a little bit more attention, the politics is not hard to understand, Dr. Naila. It's that we're so busy trying to survive and sometimes using that as an excuse not to pay attention to details. And always getting blind. This is the point. Always getting blindsided and then complaining. Then having a bunch of opinions on things that we haven't studied. And then wondering why the failure rate is so high. And the lack of understanding and comprehension of ordinary things is absent from our people. These things which we're talking about affect people every day in yourselves and your families. And this information is not in the familiar mindset of the people. These are common everyday operations that affect these people negatively. You can charge your Negro marching, praying 32 and 33 degree Mason Eastern Stars and preacher pastors whose assignment has been keeping you all busy marching and praying while you get raped. While they got 501c3 skull and bones kickback agreements. That's also a fraud. And you be thinking they love you because they call you people of color. Don't even know that people of color means artificial person, which means corpse, which means the dead. And that's true. But they keep giving these marching guys honor, don't they?
Yeah.
And let us pray. And then they get a $60 million plane to ride across the country to play the game, the con artist game on the next group. And I guarantee you all of them have trusts. And that's a fact. And as far as George Washington is concerned, George Washington, the ninth president for the United States, divided up the states, the estates, into states and politically formed them into districts. And that can be found in the Messages and Papers of the Presidents, Volume 1, page 99. 1828 Dictionary of Estates.
There's a question here from 33 Black Mac 33. Why is or what reason the Supreme Court in Philadelphia is the only true court? Please explain.
You got to remember the true republic is
should that be the venue to charge them with crimes?
International Court of Justice would be. Even the fact that most people don't know that, that's a point of information so that people will know that. Also understand why you see the Whigamo Party members of the Cotton Whigs and the Conscience Whigs fighting over Supreme Court placements. Because the Supreme Court is what? De facto. People keep forgetting the Organic Act of 1871. See, Dr. Niall, this is the point. If people would remember these things, they would remember that these people are de facto. They moved de facto the government to the District of Columbia. However, Philadelphia is the Capitolium of the legitimate republic. Still is. You see the point? See, if you know one thing, other things make sense. Do you understand? But if you're not aware of certain things, other things don't make sense. See, in the mind, they keep looking at Washington, D.C. as legitimate government. That's the democracy order. The republic order is at Shakamoxon. It's Philadelphia. That never changed. Do you see the point? But no one promotes that. Why? They don't want you to know that. When me and Grand Sheik Nature filed a claim against the officials and representatives as Asbury Park, etc., in 205, you know what their representatives used to argue to dismiss the case,
No.
which we'll read in the future. Federal Rule 12b-6. You know what that is?
No.
Diversity of nationality. How come you don't see the Moors, particularly people who have been criticizing us, talk about that? You see them making negative statements, but you won't see them presenting that information. And why did the representatives of Asbury Park, etc., use 12b-6 as an argument in the federal courts to dismiss the case? Diversity of nationality is Article 3, Section 2. Anyway. Let's present something else to you. And so when you understand that, you understand how the Social Security number is actually a routing number for the estates of the people. Also, the people are held as human capital, and that's Executive Order 13037. And 31, the United Nations has financed the operation of the United States government for over 50 years. And the United States Department of Treasury is part of the United Nations. And they claim to own every man, every woman, and every child in America. That's their claim, and they operate from that perspective. And this is back to the point and principle where the people must proclaim their nationality and not claim to be a U.S. citizen, because they are actually agreeing to be owned by the United Nations and via the popes of Rome. That's a fact.
It's gone. Let me see.
Now, number 30, everything under the jurisdiction of the United States is up for sale. The bridges, the roads, the water, the schools, the hospitals, the prisons, the airports, etc., etc. And did anyone take the time to check out who brought Kirmuth Lake? I'm going to repeat. Did anyone take the time to check out who bought Kirmuth Lake? That's Kiamath, Lake. And do research in Executive Order 12803. And that's for those who are worrying about voting, whether they're going to vote one of these Zionist operatives as president of the corporation that has been dissolved. But yet these people are still operating under the guise of government.
Is that Kirmuth or is that Klamath? Is that in Oregon?
That's Klamath. Yeah, that's Klamath.
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 Yeah, you said I.
And you're going to discover that it was sold. Now you understand why people don't have access to water, and like private companies are selling you bottled water, and the people haven't paid attention to that's not by accident, that they've actually sold the water, the people's water, to private companies, and they've been have stock in it, and they've been getting kickbacks, and the people have been what? Acclimated to buying water that already belonged to them. It never dawns on them, they've been...
Because bottled water companies manufacture...
They don't manufacture water.
Bottles.
And poison in the plastic.
That's all.
PBHs. Yeah. Look at international venues in other countries that will not allow the U.S. corporation operatives to send their bottled water, plastic water, to them, knowing that it gives people cancer.
Klamath Lake Land Trust.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Trust.
Now you understand why people now got to pay to go to the shores and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. And you notice how they always put railroads right next to the water so the people don't have access to the waters?
And they only, look, $255,000 is what they purchased it for.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. Well, there you go.
Update the thumbnail.
Number 29. It is not, emphasize not, the duty of the police to protect you, the people. The Fraternal Order of Police. The duty of the police job is to protect the corporation and to arrest code breakers. See SOP versus Tallahassee, 348 SO, second, 363, Reef versus City of Philadelphia, 477 F 1262, Lynch versus North Carolina Department of Justice, 376 SE, second, 247. Your references. So the people keep calling policemen lawmen, don't they? They're commercial mercenaries in place to protect the corporations and the corporate interests. Now you understand why they murder people on the street. That and the people be wondering, how are they violating their so-called constitutional rights? And people don't understand that these people are not constitutional officers. They are commercial mercenaries. Their position is to protect the corporation, not you. Isn't it again why our people should be nationalizing and formulating their own political platforms that already existed prior to occupation? Our concepts of how we've been looking at government and governance has been totally incorrect and corrupted.
Charmaine Stewart asks, how does the FIN work with or in contrast of the SSN? I noticed the FIN on the medical record and hospital bans after having my son.
All of them are private corporations for human trafficking. They're wardship tenure operations on the military tenures. And that, so you want to look at the Christian Black codes. And particularly around Article 6, where you see the condition of the mother is the condition of the child. So you're dealing with status. So birth certificates are bonds against the womb, and the marriage certificates are also. So take that all into consideration, and your answer is self-evident. We have a lot of elementary work to do among ourselves. And it ain't marching and praying.
Ragged Collars asked if the Pope has a social security number.
He don't need it. The social security number is for slaves.
Question was asked, how can they lawfully sell off our ancestral lands?
You claim to be Negro, black, and colored, you don't own land. That's why they did the brands, for you to get off the treaties and for them to be able to breach their obligation to treaties by claiming you to be somebody that you're not and getting you to agree to being somebody that you're not. That's what nom de guerre are for, sometimes referred to as brands. That's the function of nom de guerre. It's not just a corrupted idea, it has a legal function. This is why we always remind people to kind of understand the reason for the branding slander, to study not just the Dred Scott case of 1857, but also the William Dungy case of 1854, 1853, in that era, when Lincoln defended William Dungy, when Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer. And that'll give you a clear insight of the proper concepts of how you should be thinking of the function of brands and slanders, and also why a couple of generations ago, when our people, if you called them black or Negro, you had a fight because it was about estate and dead status. It was not about identity that our people think those brands are today. They think they are brands of endearment or that they're African names of endearment. No, they were slanders to steal, put in place to steal people's estates. So to be clear on what I'm talking about, read the William Dungy case. And many of you had that case, synopsis on that case on the flash drive that you've gotten from the House of Reawakened Minds. It become under the title Lincoln Defends Moore.
Was Lincoln a Moor?
Lincoln, he had Moorish blood. Yes, he did. But, and this is why you see them alter a lot of the early pictures. And also in when you start doing the research in Illinois in the area, when he was running for president, this is why you see them have him dressed in Moorish garb, for satire and mockery. Yes, it's not a secret, but do you notice how you don't see so-called Negro and black scholars talk about that when they're talking about so-called history and Emancipation Proclamation? They will never show you. They'll never dig up the obvious and show you Abraham Lincoln in satire in the papers dressed in Moorish garb because they don't want the people to know that they're Moors. And we're not talking about digging deep history. We're talking contemporary history. Would you hear them talking about Emancipation Proclamation and stuff like that, won't you? And 14th Amendment, which was never lawfully ratified. And then you'll never see them talking about the murder of Abraham Lincoln being a coup d'etat assassination. And you'll never hear them talking about that Lincoln was the last lawful president operating by treaty and constitution on the land. Now, these are all documented facts. Why is it that they conveniently avoid talking this information when it's documented? Do you think there's a motive? Of course there is. Of course there is.
Yes, of course I do believe there's a motive. Mike Bay says, Taj, I have a old/new political party, but I need some help getting it off the ground.
Well, if it's an old political party, let's look at it this way. You don't need a political party. It's the political parties that have been the problem. You need to enforce the Constitution, thus the treaties that superseded, which is the supreme law of the land. That's the political party. Is the republic. You see? It's sort of like whenever we get in this concept that we have to reinvent the wheel, we're almost always on the wrong path. Doesn't mean that the idea is not good. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Let's look at it like this. Let's look at it like this realistically, Dr. Nayela. The treaties and the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. What happens if you come up with an idea, you want to invent something new? Can you make somebody be a party to it?
No.
Isn't that self-evident?
Yeah.
Because you're talking contract law. So contract law, you can't impose a contract on someone who's not a party to the contract and make up a contract after the fact and then tell them that they're obligated to it. You see the problem with the 14th Amendment and things like that are really not law, or them even saying that people of African descent tagged as Negroes are U.S. citizens. They've never even been through the Naturalization Act, and they're not Negroes. You see the whole fraud? If you can understand fundamental contract law, things that they've told you that are real are obviously fictions, and you don't even need anyone to analyze it for you.
I mean,
you need fundamental knowledge, fundamental rules. This is why it's important, Dr. Nayela, for people to understand, even in here where it says you can't use the Constitution as a defense because you're not a party to it, they need to know what that actually means.
Right.
If you're not a specific identified party of the constructors of that agreement, you can't use it. It's an inherited document. Meaning, you know, a lot of times people, from an emotional point of view, and you can understand because we've been abused, they was saying, you know, black people have constitutional rights. The statement itself is a fraud. Because one, no black people were party to that Constitution. Moors were. Now, the people who call themselves black or have been tagged black are, yes, of Moorish descent. But if they deny their pedigree, they can't claim the law that's put in place before they were even born to secure their rights, the rights of their progeny. The Constitution for the United States is an international document, but is a contract that limits their authority in their operations and trade on the land of Morocco. So now when you're talking about descendants and progeny, now you're going into treaty law. That's what Article 3, Section 2 is. And consular venue is treaty law. That's it, all over the world, not just here, all over the world. This is fundamental knowledge. That's not an idea, that's fundamental knowledge.
So when is consular appropriate?
It's only appropriate when you have controversy between you and them. Other than that, you're justices.
So if more to more,
it's justices. It's not consular.
And those justices,
it's not consular between Moors.
So between Moors, it's justices.
And foreign states, then it's consular. No different than, like, say, for instance, if you can deal, because most courts are dealt with on paper, not necessarily a venue. You can go to a venue that's a court, as an example, and someone enters something into the court in relationship to an estate, right? And they're walking into a court, and because a person in there says that they're a judge, and they say, we have no jurisdiction there, this is a traffic court. But yet that same room and that same magistrate can, in another venue on Wednesday, as an example, be a criminal court, and in another venue it's a civil court. Then on another venue it's a traffic court. The venue changes based on the type of jurisprudence that's being adjudicated. The jurisdiction is, and then you may have certain magistrates that have no jurisdiction because they're not assigned. They're not assigned in those venues.
And they should know what they're assigned.
The venue changes. See, people need to understand the venue can change in the same room according to what the issue is. And then the administrator may have jurisdiction or not, according to national or international law. When it comes to any treaties, anywhere in the world, the venue is a consular venue. All over the world, not just here. Why has it not been operating here at North America? Because Dwight D. Eisenhower, in 1954 to 1956, they relinquished jurisdiction at Morocco, and thus consular courts were eliminated. However, they've been maintaining jurisdiction in the affairs of the descendants of the Moors under the guise of the 14th Amendment and still robbing them of their birthright. Why? Because the Moors and the hybrid Europeans didn't recognize their obligation to the treaties via consular venue. Matter of fact, they didn't even teach it. And so what has been happening to our people? They've been abused constantly under municipal incompetent courts. And even the Supreme Courts for them have declared them, state courts and municipal courts, as incompetent and having no jurisdiction. And yet our people keep doing what? Seeking remedy in them and not getting it. And then getting frustrated. Then talk about marching and praying. Is the whole platform corrupted and incompetent? Yes, it is.
Marvin May said, are we citizens or not?
Citizens of what? So if you say, are we daughters and sons or not? Who's your mother? So if you're talking nation state, name the nation. Citizens of what? Of what jurisdiction? See, so the question is, though many people ask that question, you notice how the question is really an empty and loaded question. And when a person doesn't know civics, they're assuming things that are not only invalid, but incompetent. So when you're saying that, are we citizens, you must name the nation state. And it never dawns on them because that phrase is being thrown around to trick them into agreeing to be U.S. stock.
North America.
North America is a continent. How many political nation states are operating at North America? You got Canada. You got a defunct and dissolved corporation operation called the United States that last went bankrupt last time in 2013, which is on the record with the motu proprio from the Pope of Rome, who owns it. Then you have Mexico. Then you have the United States of San Salvador. Then you have the United States of Brazil. They're all the United States. Which one you talking about? Do you see how? See, whenever people are not really, when you're thinking, you ask the right questions. When you're not thinking, you assume that question is legitimate and full and valid. The question itself is flawed and loaded, but yet it's generally thrown around and never even challenged, isn't it? Isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so people keep giving jurisdiction to foreign operators, not knowing that when they say, I'm a U.S. citizen, they're saying I am human stock to back the United States corporation debt that has been dissolved and all of its departments. And that's what you're doing, even when you sign the census. Now, that's a fact.
Charmaine Stewart said I had a so-called judge leave the room and never come back.
Of course, because he had no jurisdiction. He left the bench. He left the battlefield. Now, what do? You're supposed to, by international law, dismiss the case because you're the judge. He's an executive administrator. You probably came in there with some kind of principle that neutralized the situation. Maybe I don't know if you went in there with a national standard, or if you went in there, declared your nationality, and immediately he recognized that you knew better. So rather than wake up the rest of the slaves, he walked out. Without telling you he had no jurisdiction. And when he walked out, you were supposed to do the same thing and dismiss it for the record. However, if you abandon that right, somebody else might come in and claim an ecclesiastical position over you, over your estate, and then drag you with it, which is what they've been doing. We have rights, we haven't been exercising them. This is what, isn't it interesting, Dr. Naila, how much controversy that has been thrown around these last 7 years or so when we've been telling people to enforce the international venue of consular court that already exists, and you'll see even so-called conscious Moors criticizing constitutional enforcement of Article 3 and diversity of nationality, but yet they claim nationality. When that is the venue, and they act like we made that up. Isn't that interesting when you think about it?
Yeah, yeah. Charmaine also asked if you could explain the difference between a municipality and where was it?
All municipalities, you need to look behind. All right, do the research on all municipalities and you'll see a construction date.
Metropolitan and a municipal.
You'll see them. You'll see they're all private foreign corporations.
I know what here the threat was, or that was.
I already know.
It was going to be that the city was afraid.
They're claiming jurisdiction, aren't they?
Will become a metropolitan, which would mean, say, the county or the state could swallow up everything, and so they don't have their autonomy.
Aren't we talking jurisdiction?
Yeah.
It's still. What did we do a month or so ago? We did understanding jurisdiction.
Right.
All of it is the power to act and the authority to act. So when you're talking jurisdiction, you're talking about the authorization via quo warranto. They can't produce it because they don't have it. They're claiming authority that they don't have, and the people keep thinking, it's sort of like them saying, I'm the president of your estate. And people say, well, how can, what I'm supposed to, how much taxes I'm supposed to be paying? These people are frauds, phonies, and imposters, and are not government. They've been pretending, and we've been going along with it.
Marvin Mays, I'm from Florence, Mississippi, so tell me if I'm a citizen or not. Wow. Hopefully you just
Again,
explained it. Maybe that is.
think about your treatment. Then you ask them if that corporate state is your mother. She been kicking your ass, ain't she, daily?
Like yes or no?
No.
No. There you go.
So now you better find out what's really up.
Okay. First Nation will speak on the vaccine. Is there anyone? Dryan Marbe says, or Drian, is there or can anyone from the Moorish nation will ever speak under the Great Seal in a public forum?
Well, you do it every day when you declared your nationality. A proclamation is a public forum.
Charmaine says, I did declare my nationality. What should I do now to correct this? I do know.
Declaring is not just saying it, it's acting.
In other words, this is the person who said that the judge, the so-called judge, left the bench. And I'm supposing, based on what your response was, that if you did not,
dismiss the case for the record,
did not,
and state for the record that, and don't call him a judge, because if you call him a judge, you just created the jurisdiction again. Call it the foreign executive administrator left the court venue, which is a declaration that they have no jurisdiction, of which I agree for the record. We all know that the proper venue is a consular court, which has been dismissed by the corporate entity operative CEO known as Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1954, and he's affirming that he has no authority. And I agree that this venue and its foreign officers have no authority, and therefore, me being the judge and the true American, dismiss the case for the record.
Can that be done non pro
tempore? Now for then, yes, that's what it's all about.
Okay.
See, but the deal of it is knowing what your right and your obligation is. See, our people need to understand your declaration of right is also your obligation. See, our people keep looking for authority in another man. That's what the mentality. Do you get the point? We keep giving up our rights and then getting mad because someone steals them. It's like you keep throwing the change out your pocket and then looking back, hey, they're picking up my change. The rule of law is you're abandoning it. If someone goes in your pocket and takes something out, that's stealing, isn't it?
Yes.
But if you go out, you go so-called, how they say in the de facto venue, cash a check, and then you go out on the corner and throw the stuff on the air, and they say, don't nobody pick my shit up now. In the rule of law, you've abandoned it. Why do you think that senator told people, I think the woman senator, I forget her name, told people when they was doing these foreclosures with MERS and stuff like that, and that senator, she said, don't leave your house?
Yeah.
Why do you think she said that? Because it's abandonment. That's why the banks keep taking them. They choosing you. All these foreclosures are abandonments. Let's look at this. Let's go into this. You all, on your flash drive that Dr. Naila sent you, remember we have the James Traficant U.S. bankruptcy. This is on the record. United States Congressional Record, March the 17th, 1993, volume 33, page H-1303. And that's Representative James Traficant Jr., Representative of Ohio, addressing the House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, we are here now in Chapter 11, and members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government. We are setting forth, hopefully, a blueprint for our future. There are some who say it's a coroner's report that will lead to our demise. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, March the 9th, 1933, 48 Statute 1, Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt being bankrupt and insolvent. House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session, June the 5th of 1933. Joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and to abrogate the gold clause dissolved the sovereign authority of the United States and dissolved the official capacities of all United States governmental officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government exists today in name only. United States Congressional Record, Volume 33, page H-1303. What else needs to be said? It's not opinion, that's documented record. So who's been forcing taxes from you all? And are you all citizens of that dissolved corporation?
Roxy Bay asked if there is a difference between an aboriginal title and an allodial title.
They're relative and superior to all other claims, mortgages, and deeds all over the world. They are the legitimate and lawful titles and claim of ownership distinguished from any deeds or mortgages, all of which are de facto. Aboriginal titles and allodial titles are de jure and in fact lawful and legal and superior to all other instrumental claims. That's a fact. And for those who are listening here at the House of Reawakening Minds, please do research on Aboriginal titles and allodial titles, which are relative.
Ira Knowles, I'm going to answer this question. And is there a difference between 6 in one hand and one half and one half and a dozen other? It's the same thing.
Yes.
It just means the exact same thing.
Yes, but they need to be aware of these. See now, all right. Let's look at this. Let's look at this. This is the same records, congressional records.
Okay.
Paragraph. Assets of the debtor can be hypothecated, which means to pledge something as a security without taking possession of it, as a security by the lender or underwriter. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913, etc., stipulated that the interest on the debt was to be paid in gold. There was no stipulation in the Federal Reserve Act for ever paying the principal. Prior to 1913, most Americans owned clear allodial title to property, free and clear of any liens or mortgages until the adoption of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which was used to hypothecate and hypothecated all property within the federal United States to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, in which the trustees, who are held as stockholders, held legal title. The U.S. citizen, designated as tenant and franchisee, was registered as a beneficiary of the trust via his or her birth certificate. And in 1933, the federal United States hypothecated all of the present and future properties, assets, and labor of their quote-unquote subjects, the 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, and designated it to the Federal Reserve System. All that's congressional records. It's not opinion. That's documented congressional records. How come your Negro marching leaders and stuff won't tell these people this is how they've been hypothecating and gentrifying communities?
Was looking for something I saw that was kind of interesting, but I guess it wasn't for me to find it again. I just want to make sure there's somebody who had something to say about elderly Moors, but whatever. And it says there was a comment about it's time for the elderly Moors to sit in the back. You better keep some elderly Moors in the forefront to help you so-called youthful Moors. I mean,
that's right. I understand the position because these people, because many of them, they have been traitors. This is what people need to know.
But everybody's not a traitor. I mean,
no. Listen. What we have going on here is a bunch of carpenters that don't know what a saw is, but they're publicly claiming to be carpenters. That answers a lot of things. Meaning certain things that people have positions, we got to stop making excuses for them. You know how they say you can't be in a sewing factory and then you work in a sewing factory for years and don't know what a needle is. You can't be what you call an elder in the Moorish Science Temple of America and pretend that you don't know that Drew Ali declared in the divine warning to the nations to enforce the Constitution and to take your places among the affairs of men. And that's absolutely not a religious statement. It's a civic statement. And then turn around and tell the people that Drew Ali didn't teach civics and have been getting away with it. And people keep making excuses that they don't understand. But they got them titles. I think people need to pay attention to things which are self-evident. It's just that people don't want to admit that people that they know are traitors. That's all. Don't confuse your biases with obvious facts.
But it's also very important, as was stated earlier, and the reason why we had this as a topic is because so many Moors are looking for solutions outside themselves, and not always about nationality.
They're always looking. See, this is the deal.
Everybody's looking for the savior.
This is what now. That's part of the training,
right?
Isn't that part of the training?
Absolutely.
Isn't part of the training with us that got us in trouble? Of looking for the sacrificial Jesus,
yes.
Looking for, meaning they keep looking for someone else to pick the field and cook the food according to their desires, while they take no responsibility and have no participation whatsoever. This translates into, dag, man, check them sisters out. I'm getting with all of them. You know, you really shouldn't do that because that's a sin. Oh, no, Jesus is going to forgive me, so I'm going to bump them all off tonight and do all kinds of stuff, but I'll be forgiven tomorrow and give Pastor Pigfoot $5 in prayer. And this is what we do. So he's going to die for all our sins, so we kick his ass and our sins are solved. That's that mentality. They're trained, that training, mental training, is looking for the sacrificial lamb, not taking responsibility for your actions, blaming your devilish deeds on the lower self, on the mystical devil. Oh, you notice how many people, they've been stealing everybody's bicycles, stealing everybody's lunch out the refrigerator and stuff like that, or robbing people's accounts and stuff like that. And then when they get caught, all of a sudden, I found Jesus. It's always after they get caught. Well, I didn't know what I was doing, but now I'm saved. Watch your pockets while they talking to you.
Well,
They know exactly what they're doing. You notice that people don't make they don't make mistakes. They make decisions. They make choices. Anyway, again, self-government, recognizing, and a lot of this information is shared with you for you to not accept, for you to recognize that these persons and people and operators of different agencies who have been claiming to be legitimate creatures of the Constitutions are frauds and have always been frauds, and they know they have been frauds. You haven't known it or acknowledged it, but yet you've been suffering. Therefore, it's your duty and responsibility to declare your nationality, your birthright, restoration of your estate, and learn those things necessary to make you more competent as a national to your own nation state, which has been under occupation. And remind you again, the House of Reawakening Minds have supported you and have been standing on your behalf, asking you to take responsibility in your affairs. So you support the House of Reawakening Minds, and we appreciate those who have been supporting.
This month, this is our
9 years this month.
October.
Gestation.
Yeah, 9 years.
Mm.
Yeah. So we had over 1,300 people on this live, and so I think we got like 100 to maybe 100 notes in donations, and we do appreciate it, but it's definitely not commensurate with what you've been giving out.
Yes.
And so we're just going to say, those of you who support regularly, we do appreciate you. The House of Reawakening Minds is, a foundational organization, and we have laid the foundation for others.
Yes.
You know what I mean? For other organizations, and so we want to make sure that this entity that you've come to respect
on behalf of the people,
right, is supported. So we're just asking for your support for House of Reawakening Minds. We appreciate you. Grand Sheik, I'll just see if there's any last questions. We got 2 minutes, but not that you're gonna. So we do appreciate. Here's a question, I'll just throw it in there. Can Moorish Americans use UCC codes to state their arguments against the de facto government?
Remember, you're walking into a trade jurisdiction. Commercial codes means trade. Superior to that is the treaties. Because remember, it's still contract law. So you can't command that someone trade with you, can you? You ever notice that just like, what's that woman a couple years ago, Troche, who perfected the UCC claims?
I don't remember her.
And on the birth certificate, etc. And then the ecclesiastical operators tried to make her disappear, and it hadn't been for the fact that so many people are getting conscious of the Uniform Commercial Codes and knowing that the United States Corporation is a human trafficking trading corporation is the only reason why they didn't disappear her. Yeah. Now understand they're operating under commercial codes, which is why people promote it. However, the treaty and the Constitution already supersede those operations, even though that's ancient law. That's ancient law, but they've corrupted everything. You get this point? Mm-hmm. And keep in mind that still in the principle, if a person's not in their proper self, you're still dealing with estates when you're dealing with the routing numbers that are applied in the commercial codes.
Here's one of my
and indeed, the administrators are operating on that venue too.
Another question. Ask Grand Sheik if, and this is Kareem Bey, if we are in a quarantine because we are in a closed system on a flat earth.
Now, this is why. let's look at it like this. You're in quarantine because the trade windows of the world has frozen up and the credit windows have frozen up. And it's not just because you're on a flat earth or in a bubble. That's another subject matter, but not relative to this quarantine. Quarantine is because the people are waking up and the systems that has been operating is collapsing. While that's an interesting subject matter, the reason is because the trade windows and the credit windows of the world have frozen.
We thank you. Okay. Well, that is good. Thanks for sending me in.
Oh, and the stock market has crashed.
Oh yeah.
It's covered. You know, it's those are the real things that they're covering up.
Yeah, a lot of things that.
And buying time.
Yeah, they don't need the people the way they don't need people the way they needed people before.
They want to get rid of the people.
Right.
That's why they want to stick them. That's why the Gates Foundation wants to give them nanoviruses with metals in it so they can cook them with the accelerated military microwave operations called 5G and others. And that ain't the only tech that they're putting out there. They want to get rid of the people also because they robbed all the pension plans. Yeah. And this is another reason they're mad at Trump, because he's not allowed them to do it. He's interrupting their operations. And that's not a defense of Trump. I'm just telling you what Trump is doing. Part of what he's doing. And he's using their fraud platform to do it. See, they can't go against them so much because it's their own platform.
And then too, I'm looking, must have come on late because it's asking why is the stock market doing so well? You addressed that.
Yes, of course it is.
It's artificial.
It's artificially pumped up.
Yeah.
Trump is pumping it up so that the the Zionists don't kill the pensions of the people. Because the deal of it is that they're crashing the economy because they're attacking the people. And they're forcing people who have minor sicknesses into nursing homes so they can black pill them so that they don't have to meet the unmeetable pension payoffs and entitlements that the politicians have robbed, running these wars all around the world and giving funding to foreign nation states. And now they've drained the people and they need to kill them off.
Right.
So they're getting the people to help them make you sicker by breathing in carbon monoxide, which means if you have any lung diseases or lung sicknesses or heart problems, that it increases the probability of you getting sick by putting a mask over your nose. You're breathing in carbon monoxide. You're breathing out poison and breathing it right back in. They won't tell you that. And also, if a virus jumped over 6,000 miles across the ocean, kicking your asses, 6 feet ain't going to help you.
Well, SP Mark says protest was large in front of Downing Street last week, and tomorrow is to be bigger. Councils are saying, what does it say? Councils are, let me go, I lost it. And then councils are saying these systems have been hacked, all sham. I guess that's over in
They knew that from day one. See, aren't we back to the digital issue?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what are they convincing the people? Remember, they've been using digital among themselves for over 50 years. And the people think it's new.
ACH and all that stuff.
They think it's new.
Yeah.
Now, look how many businesses where people have accounts, whether they're banks or even what you call trading platforms, stock platforms, and funds that people have investment in, and always a year or two after they tell you where their accounts have been hacked and they got everybody's private information, etc. And many people have totally lost their savings, etc. So what do you think they're going to do when they talk you into total digital? What do you think is going to happen? Is it going to be other than what's been going on anyway?
I don't know what this
Like duh.
King Bay says, what about
Like really duh.
What about the 10? This will be the last one. What about the 10-day martial law announcement from Trump?
Been in martial law since 33. It's back. Isn't this why we're doing what we're doing?
All right. All right. 10 days, in fact. Well, this must be a more increased visible.
No, what is happening is coming out in the open. Meaning that, put it this way, they've been kicking your asses so thoroughly that they're stopping pretending anymore. Meaning they took all the mask off and kicking your ass in your face.
Yeah.
They're not wasting finance on programs to fool you. They're just being blunt. That's all. It's not new. They've been kicking your ass all the time. It's almost like people just, there's a psychology that people just don't want to recognize that these people are de facto. In the face of all evidence. You know, they took my grandmom's house and took my grandmom's land that we should have been inheritance, and then they stole my mom's land and my father's land. Then it looks like I think they're trying to steal mine too. Do you think that they're going to start stealing my? How many generations y'all need to recognize that these people are de facto? You know, years ago in civil rights marches and shit, you know, they beat up and killed Medgar Evers and other people, and they killed Martin Luther King. They've been killing more people regularly on the street, and even now. What? Breonna Taylor? Come on, what? Do you think they're unlawfully murdering our people? Duh.
I'm going to do this one last question. I said that, but Portia Talib Elbey says, can you please explain the importance of honoring thy parents?
Because that's the right of inheritance. Remember, when we was reading the congressional records where they're hypothecating people's property, keep in mind the first thing that they did, one of the first things they did, is take the people outside the human family with the branding system, which are known as nom de guerre, such as Negro, Black, and Colored, and Indian, and things like this. Get the people to agree to be these things that they're not. Therefore, they're not protected under the established laws of the land, which is treaty and constitution. Of course, not being a party to it, they have no defense mechanism. And at the same time, they have abandoned it. And keep in mind that liberties, rights, and inheritances, corporal and incorporeal, are inherited. They're not given by nations, states, or political agendas or political agencies established under the International Monetary Fund, nor under the Zionist order of the Federal Reserve. They already exist with you. Without the honor of your mother and father, you've abandoned your estate, and that's the hypothecation claims that they're making. Under the doctrine of discovery, all of that is documented. It becomes self-evident that anyone that does not honor their mothers and fathers logically do not have rightful claim to the inherited estates.
And when you say that,
called honor your mothers and your fathers that your days may be longer.
In spirit, honor them in word, deed, both.
And action and in sincerity.
Yeah.
Even the fact that let's look at this, Dr. Naila. How many people without any, what you would call, deep research, as an example, one of the world's most awarded scholars and writers, right, in the world, his name was Joel A. Rogers.
Nature knows no color.
And Joel A. Rogers even wrote, and all of these scholars, Clark and James and all the rest of them, has researched him and had this knowledge even themselves, and find that all these people that call themselves people of color and black and so-called, they're always playing safe, the melanated people, rather than just say that the fact that these people are Moors, to avoid the telling the truth, and then keep losing right of their estate. That is dishonor. And any man, woman, or child who won't confess their own has no right of claim of estate. That's a state law. That pre-exists colonial operations. So if you want to keep on calling the elephant a pit bull, keep on playing.
All right. We're going to go now. We want to thank each and every one of you for hanging in there with us. And thank you, Grand Sheik.
And sharing
Always.
with us, yes.
Yeah, as always for a stellar class. We greatly appreciate it. And if you haven't sent us a dollar, a note or something, please make sure you do. We want to make sure that we can properly say thank you to Grand Sheik and as again, to support House of Reawakening Minds. Just want to make it plain that House of Reawakening Minds is the House of Reawakening Minds is still in existence, and we want to continue to bring you these and other classes. So we appreciate you, and we are going to say good night.
And have a grand evening.
Grand evening, and till next time. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Islam.
Islam.